How do you start trusting again after you've been burned? I was in love. She was my wife, and I thought she was my best friend. Debbie and I had been married for 6 years when I found out it was all an illusion. We were living in Portland at the time. Debbie had recently taken a job as an internal auditor for the largest real estate firm in the city, and I was in sales with a national machine tool manufacturer. Given the range of my products, I was rarely downtown. Most of my clients lived in the suburbs or outlying areas of Western Oregon, but on this day I found myself in the city with an extra 2 hours to spare. I called Debbie to invite her to lunch and was disappointed when she told me she needed to finish her spreadsheet before an important meeting in the afternoon. I didn't want to miss the opportunity, so I stopped by Jake's for a plate of their crawfish etouffee. I enjoyed the nutty brown sauce with rice while listening to the ladies at the table behind me and wondering how they did it. All 4 women seemed to be talking at the same time. It wasn't the first time I had observed this phenomenon, and it always puzzled me. Men couldn't do that. I sat smiling to myself, trying to figure out how anyone could understand this gibberish when something one of the ladies said imprinted itself on my mind. I wasn't the only person intrigued by the lady's question, because the other 3 women at the table immediately fell silent. So Deborah Miller is doing the dirty deeds with Simon Walker? This question immediately caught my attention because my wife's name is Deborah. She uses that name in her professional life. Only family and friends call her Debbie. And Miller is the name she's had with me since we got married. I'm Mark Miller, by the way. One of the ladies asked, "Why, do you know?" The first one replied, "I was sitting in Deborah's office when she got a call from her husband. She declined his invitation, citing that she was working on her lunch hour. 5 minutes later, Simon poked his head into her office and asked if she was ready to leave. She nodded to Simon, then blushed and looked at me again, obviously embarrassed that I had heard her lie to her husband. My heart dropped at her words, but my ears remained alert as the other ladies continued this stream of gossip. It didn't take Simon long to sink his fangs into another married woman, did it? Deborah has only been in the office for a month. And it's only been 2 months since Heidi Johnson quit. I heard her husband made her quit after he found out about her affair with Simon. Can you imagine a mom with 2 preschoolers falling for Simon? What's his secret? You mean besides those big blue eyes, Ryan Gosling faces? All 4 women started laughing. I had heard enough, so I paid the bill in cash and went to my car. The rest of the day passed like a blur. I tried to figure out how I could confirm my worst fears. If Debbie slept with this asshole, we're screwed. So now, should I hire a private investigator to follow her, or were there other means to do so? Heck, I called Debbie's office and pretended to be a salesman. The receptionist kindly informed me that Miss Miller was out of the office and would be back at 2 p.m. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed that the rumors are unfounded. When Debbie got home that evening, I tried my best to act normal, although I almost lost my temper when she apologized for not being able to have dinner with me. She even had the nerve to kiss me on the cheek as she apologized. She asked if I minded making dinner because she wanted to take a little soak in the tub before we sat down to dinner. She poured herself a glass of wine and headed into the master bathroom. It was probably her way of cleaning up the evidence. Coming home and taking a shower would be too obvious. Debbie was smart enough to use the bathroom as camouflage. How many more nights would she use this ruse? I quickly prepared a salad and a tray of cheese and crackers, then headed for the bathroom. I undressed in the bedroom and went into the bathroom naked. Debbie nearly jumped out of her skin when I walked into the bathroom and started climbing on top of her. "Mark, what are you doing? Trying to scare me to death?" "Well, if you remember, Deb, I live here too. I just thought we could use the hot water together." Debbie has a clue when she's lying or needs time to answer a question. She doesn't know she has it, and I've never told her about it. I have seen it from time to time. Just last week I saw it show when a good friend of ours asked Debbie if she liked her new hairstyle. Debbie blinked twice and then told her friend that she absolutely loved it. Debbie showed it off before replying to me. I was just about to leave because I was terribly hungry. "Is dinner ready?" Before Debbie could wrap a towel around herself, I did my best to examine her. No distinctive bite marks, etc. Catching Debbie turned out to be incredibly easy. That evening, I downloaded a samizdat book called Amateur Detective Catching a Cheating Spouse to my Kindle. It only took me a couple of hours to read the basics, and the next morning I completed 2 tasks while Debbie was in the shower. First, I checked Debbie's calendar on her smartphone. At noon yesterday, Debbie had allotted 2 hours marked working through lunch. I noticed that the previous Thursday, the same 2 hours were allocated with the same notation. How sneaky of her. The second task was to download a tracking app on her phone. That was too easy, and after thinking about it, I checked my phone. Damn, there was a similar app on my phone. I quickly deleted the app from Debbie's phone. There was no point in rushing. I saved the app on my phone. It might come in handy later. You read stories about guys acting normal while waiting for proof of a cheating wife, but you can't believe how hard it is until you try it yourself. For the next 5 days, I tried my best to be a loving husband. Every morning I checked her calendar. Tuesday morning turned out to be a good day. Between noon and 2, there was a note. Working until lunch. After breakfast, I drove to my office and did my best to get something done. On the way to work, I bought a cell phone at Walmart. At 11 o'clock, I forwarded my regular phone to the new cell phone and left the regular phone on my desk. If Debbie had checked the tracking app she had installed on my phone, it would have shown that I was 30 kilometers from her office. If she called me, I could answer my cell phone. I got to the city center with 15 minutes to spare and settled into a Starbucks across the street from her office building. At exactly noon, she walked out the front doors with a man. Holy shit, he really did look like Ryan Gosling. I walked out of Starbucks to follow them. It may seem trivial, but following the advice in the book, I put on a baseball cap, sunglasses, and had a small pebble in my right shoe to change my gait. None of that mattered because the 2 lovebirds only paid attention to each other when they walked hand in hand 1 block to the lobby of the Vintage Hotel. I figured I had almost 2 hours, so I went across the street to the bank and started transferring some money, closing our joint credit card accounts and my home equity account. Debbie and I also had credit cards in each of our names. She wouldn't find out about the closed accounts until it didn't matter. I also called my company's law firm and got a recommendation for a divorce attorney. Called her office and made an appointment for the next day afternoon. With a half hour to spare, I returned to the hotel lobby. I waited in the lobby trying to act inconspicuous and pretending to read the Wall Street Journal, but actually watching the elevator doors as the 2 of them descended. I stood up. "Debbie?" Debbie stared at me with a shocked expression on her face. "Mark, God, no!" Simon was ready to play the hero because he stepped between Debbie and me. He started saying something about being careful, holding out his hand like some damn traffic controller. I guess Debbie forgot to tell him about the boxing class I was taking because he seemed unprepared when my fist entered his stomach just below the solar plexus. He went down and actually shit his pants. Debbie just stood there, still moving her lips like some damn fish. Before she could get a word out of her, I told her, "Might as well leave the room overnight, because I don't want you coming home tonight and probably ever again." Unfortunately, right after I got home that day, a patrol car pulled up. When I opened the door, I was handcuffed and taken to the Multnomah County Jail, where I was arrested for assault. Simon pressed charges. I ended up spending the night in jail before being released the next day. When I got home, it was obvious that Debbie was in the house because almost everything small and of any value, including the watch my father had left me when he died, had been taken. I checked the closet, and Debbie's clothes were gone too. Good riddance. I still had time to shower and make it to my meeting with my lawyer. Over the next 3 months, the following happened, in no particular order. The charges against me were dropped because I was lucky that the clerk behind the front desk told the police that Simon had motioned at me, and she saw him raise his hand. It looked to her like he was ready to attack me. I guess she was the kind of person who is happy to see any scumbag with a married woman get what he deserves. She wasn't really lying, she just interpreted Simon's actions in my favor. I only communicated with Debbie through our lawyers. She tried the "can't we settle this" procedure. I firmly said no, and the divorce papers went through the system. When I refused to agree to counseling, Debbie got angry and tried to get more than half of our joint assets, alimony, and so on. Luck was on my side because my attorney argued that even though we lived in a no-fault state, I shouldn't have to suffer the consequences of her actions. The judge was swayed. My attorney took a unique approach. He reminded me that while Debbie had the option to write her own vows, she had agreed to traditional vows that included renouncing all others. So I expected fidelity. Second, we had testimony from Debbie's co-worker about a conversation in Debbie's office when she declined my invitation to lunch to have lunch with Simon. Third, and you could hear the pin drop when it came to the trial. Debbie took my father's watch while I was in jail. The judge tried her best to keep a neutral expression on her face when she heard this testimony, but it obviously made an impression on her. Even Debbie's lawyer cringed when the statement was read in court. I got the divorce and my watch back. Debbie and I split everything we had accumulated during the marriage, and she received no alimony. Debbie asked for one more thing, and it was granted. She asked to meet with me before the final papers were signed, sealed, and delivered. What the hell? I agreed, at least out of curiosity. So we sat down at her attorney's office, and she started talking shit about how much she loved me, how sorry she was for falling into Simon's trap, and how she thought we were a great couple with a great future. When I'd heard enough, I decided to bluff. Debbie, tell me about the others. Debbie blinked twice before answering. Mark, I have absolutely never been with any other man since we've been together. I shook my head. Goodbye, Debbie. That must have really pissed Debbie off, because 3 weeks later I received the CD in the mail. I found that hard to believe. I always thought Debbie was a pretty smart woman, but on the disc was a sex tape of Debbie and Simon. It started with a fully clothed Debbie looking directly into the camera. Mark, this is for you. Eat your heart out. In any case, Debbie always knew how to fight back, and it was probably taped after our divorce, so I decided to watch two good-looking people have sex. The whole video was only 15 minutes long, but it was one of the hottest 15-minute movies I've ever seen, so I thought it was worth sharing. I started a Tumblr account called Debbie Sleeps with Simon and posted the video to the site. The site racked up a couple hundred views each day and a huge number of likes before I deleted it. I seriously considered sending out links to the site to Debbie's parents, friends, and employer, but in the end, decided to ease the tension of the war. I never told Debbie about the Tumblr account, but I sent her an email warning her that another video like this would get on her father's computer screen. Debbie actually responded with an apology and an unconvincing explanation that she was still hurt by the way it ended and was trying to make me jealous. She promised to stop. I'm a pretty stand-up guy. I'm sure most people who know me even consider me a little cold. After the divorce and even after watching the video, I didn't cry, drink for a week, or think about eating my gun. I was just sad. After all, Debbie had been my best friend for the 6 years we'd been married. Her betrayal had stripped me of all trust in other people. If you start to think that people are untrustworthy, you start to see it in your everyday interactions with people. In my college psychology class, I'm pretty sure they called it a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, when a bartender or a sales associate would give me change for a 10 instead of my 20, I thought they were trying to screw me over. Little things like that turned me into a cynic. My sales job didn't help either because it's such a dog-eat-dog environment. As for women, I was doing the usual routine, chasing skirts and hanging out in bars, kind of a lonely existence, until I met Becky. A year after my divorce, I met Becky at a dinner party thrown by some clients. Becky was beautiful, with green eyes, blonde hair, a figure that belonged on the cover of a Victoria's Secret catalog, and most importantly, the personality of a woman you'd be proud to bring home to meet your family. Her smile and laughter could light up a room. They certainly lit me up. I did my best at that dinner party to be the most charming and interesting man in the world. I could have sold Mexican beer that night. Now, if only I could sell myself to this lady. As we were about to call it a night, I approached Becky and asked if I could take her out to dinner next weekend. How could I say no? She asked. You've worked so hard tonight that it makes me want to say yes. That effort should be rewarded. Is it that obvious? Yes, but I think it's nice. I also asked our hostess what she thought of you, and she said you have potential. So, let's go out next Friday and find out. After 2 months of dating, we decided to become exclusive, but we didn't rush things. We lived apart, though we spent 4 or 5 nights a week together. Every one of my friends fell in love with her. The best part was that I was starting to fall in love with Becky and felt that she might be falling in love with me. The sex started right after the promise of exclusivity. A gentleman shouldn't kiss and tell, but without going into details, let me just say that up to that point, it was the best sex of my life. Nothing was off limits for her as long as it was limited to what two people could do to each other. In and out of bed, we had fun. Yes, I was beginning to think this could be my ticket to happiness, and then the bottom dropped out. My hunch that something might be wrong came one day when Becky and I took some time off early from our jobs and were hanging out for a beer. Becky's cell phone rang. She looked at the message and ignored the call. That wasn't like her. She usually answered the phone and told me who she would call back later. After my goofiness with Debbie, I had become more observant and suspicious. I wasn't about to play the happy cuckold role again. Later that night, I had the opportunity to grab her phone and go through her call list. She had missed a call from the person listed in her contacts as Little. Looking through the call log, I found several calls between the two of them. I then looked at Becky's calendar and discovered that she had an appointment with Junior for 1 p.m. the next day. Time to find my baseball cap, sunglasses, and shoe stone again. Thursday afternoon, I was at the sandwich shop across the street from Becky's office building. She left the building alone and headed north on Broadway before entering the Marriott Hotel. As soon as I entered the lobby, Becky and some man walked up to the front desk and spoke to the desk clerk. I couldn't believe my eyes. How could this be happening to me again? I almost threw up as I approached the two of them. "You're a cheater! You lying bitch!" Becky turned around and looked at me. I don't think the look on her face would have been any different if I had shot her with a gun. The man she was with looked at me and asked, "Who is that?" Before Becky could answer his question, a second man with a Marriott name tag approached. He stared at the three of us in confusion, but before anyone could say another word, Becky ran out of the lobby. It was all happening too fast, but I read the second man's name tag. Greg Houston, catering manager, and then looked back at the first man. The first man broke the silence. "I realize you're Mark. I'm John Riley, the man Becky hired to organize your surprise 30th birthday party here at the Marriott. I think you just really blew it." Becky never returned my calls again after that day. A week later, I woke up to find a box of things I had left at her apartment on the front porch of my townhouse. Inside was a note that simply read, "I don't need any of the stuff I left at your house. Give it all to charity. Becky." For the next 6 months, I fell into despondency. I ate, slept, and went to work. One afternoon, I decided to go out and attend the annual Portland Craft Beer Festival on the waterfront. I was just lucky enough to run into Becky there. She was with a guy, and they were clearly a couple. After Becky introduced us to each other, she asked him if she could talk to me. To his credit, her boyfriend said yes. "Mark, I'm sorry I never spoke to you again, but I was so hurt and so angry at the time. That night I called my mother, and she told me you were damaged goods and needed to flee. I took my mother's advice and left you alone." Becky, I wish I could be mad at you for the way things ended, but unfortunately I think your mother is right. Debbie's betrayal hurt me more than I could have imagined. I'm sorry I called you names in the hotel lobby. You didn't deserve it, and I was an ass. Mark, get help. You're too good a person to live the rest of your life alone because one person betrayed your trust. Find someone who can help you, whether it's a psychologist, a priest, or whoever. I'm sorry I wasn't the right person to give you your integrity back. We almost had something. Thanks for the advice. I think you're right and I need to get a grip. Thank your boyfriend for giving us a chance to talk. You deserve a guy who trusts you enough to do that. Say hi to your mom for me and tell her what I said. She raised a beautiful woman and her instincts were right. We stepped away from each other and I saw moisture in her eyes. I had to turn around quickly before she saw my tears. So, where do you go when you need to regroup and get your life back on track? Where I should have gone when my marriage fell apart. I took a 3-week vacation and went home to Chicago. Time to play prodigal son. My mom still lived in the house we grew up in on the north side of town. I was the only one of her kids to move out of the neighborhood, so she wasn't alone. My older sister had 2 children, and my younger brother had 3. I often teased him that his wife was a regular baby-making machine. 3 children before his 30th birthday. With 5 grandchildren around, Mom was busy. but I knew she missed my presence. I can't imagine why, though, since she always claimed I was the cause of her gray hair. On my second day in town, Mom invited my brother and sister and their families over for a big feast. She made my favorite meal, her homemade lasagna, and my favorite dessert, her chocolate cheesecake. Like I said, it was just like the prodigal son. I played the long-lost uncle and gave each of my nieces an expensive electronic gift that most of them were too young to use. You could see their parents rolling their eyes at my stupidity, but I think they appreciated my sentiment. After everyone left, my mom and I did the dishes together and were able to chat. Mom wasn't one to hand out advice. That was always Dad's job, but Mom always knew what to do. Your buddy Hank Taylor still stops by from time to time. He asks how you're doing. When was the last time you two talked? Not as often as we should, and before you say it, yeah, it's probably my fault we don't talk more often. Call him. Hank was my best friend from the time we met in kindergarten until I left for college. We were inseparable. In Little League, he was the pitcher and I was the catcher. For 6 years in soccer, he was the quarterback and I was his receiver. I quit baseball my freshman year because I was a mediocre outfielder at best, and the track coach noticed in gym class my ability to pole vault and high jump. I quit soccer after my freshman year because my father was worried that I would get injured and ruin my chances of getting a college athletics scholarship. As a junior in high school, I was one of the best pole vaulters in the country, and the University of Oregon was about to admit me. My father's decision to remove me from soccer had a negative impact on Hank's life. Our soccer team had just missed out on a state championship as a junior. Much of our success was due to the Taylor-Miller combination. I was Hank's #1 partner. His senior year was a bust. Most of the players had glass hands, and his stats weren't good enough to get him a college soccer scholarship, his first love. He got a baseball scholarship to Southern Illinois and excelled himself. Hank knew my father and his influence on my decision, and he never resented me for quitting soccer. I ended up going to university and was on my way to the Olympics when a freak accident ended my pole vaulting career. During warm-ups at the NCAA finals, my pole snapped in half. It happens once in a million. I fell at an awkward angle and shattered my knee so badly that it took 2 years of therapy to regain 90%. By then, the Olympics were over, and I had earned my bachelor's degree. I also had $250,000 in the bank after the pole manufacturer settled. In case you're wondering, Debbie couldn't touch the $250,000. With me at Oregon and Hank at SIU, we started to drift apart. I was one of his best men when he married Janice and was last home after Janice gave birth to their second son. It had been a little over 2 years since I'd last seen Hank, and if he was angry at my negligence, he didn't show it. 30 minutes after I called his house, we were sitting in his backyard drinking beer. First, I learned about what was going on in Hank's life, his job, Chicago firefighter, his wife, Janice, and his 2 sons, Mark and Hank. Then it was my turn. Hank learned of my divorce from my mom, but she didn't share any details. He was less surprised by these events than I expected. He was surprised when I told him how my relationship with Becky ended and how I had trust issues. After Debbie's infidelity, I had a hard time trusting anyone. It just seemed like it was every man for himself. Hank stared at me for a moment before answering. That's because you've been hanging out with the wrong people for the last 12 years. Let me tell you a story you don't know. For all 3 years that you and Ginny dated in high school, I had a crush on Ginny. Yeah, I can see by the look on your face that you had no idea. That's the way it should be. A friend never messes with a friend's lady, no matter what. Remember that trip to my uncle's cabin in Door County? You had to work on Friday, just like the girl I was dating at the time. Ginny and I went to the lodge Friday morning to get everything ready. You and Stacy were going to come over Friday night after work. Your car broke down, and you didn't get there until close to Saturday night. So, Jeannie and I were going to spend the whole night alone because we got a call saying you were stuck in Milwaukee. We're drinking cheap wine, and Ginny is still wearing one of her bikinis after swimming in the lake. And to top it off, the power went out at the cabin. So now we're sitting by candlelight. And you want to know what happened that night between Ginny and me? Nothing, because a friend never crosses that line. And if I hadn't been a friend and tried to hit on Ginny, you know what would have happened? Nothing! because Ginny was the kind of girl who would never cheat on her man. You went to Oregon and left the people you could count on to fulfill your Olympic dream. That's fine. But you shouldn't have replaced your friends with self-centered bozos who only care about themselves. I feel sorry for you, Mark. It took me a few moments to realize what Hank had said. Then I thought about Jeannie. Do you have any idea where Ginny is or what she's doing? I haven't seen her since the first Christmas I came home my freshman year in Oregon. We practically broke up that week. Another long-distance affair gone bad. That didn't help. I promised that things would be easy with Delta and the sorority girls. Jeannie was here a couple months ago. Now she's a widow with a 5-year-old son. A widow? What happened? Her husband's last tour of duty in Afghanistan. He got shot. She didn't go into detail, but I understand that he received some important medals for bravery and, unfortunately, posthumously. Ginny is trying to hang on for their son's sake, but you can see she's barely hanging on. She still lives in San Diego County, not far from the base, and his fellow officers look after her. It would probably be nice for her to hear from you if you wanted to get her email. Is she still attractive? Did anything happen between you two while she was in town? I looked over my shoulder as I asked this to make sure Janice couldn't overhear our conversation, but the front door was closed. You weren't listening, Mark. What the hell happened to you? First of all, I would never cheat on Janice. Second of all, Jeannie would never have sex with a married man. It's just not who we are. You need to get your head out of your ass. Only Hank Taylor could talk to me like that. That night I sent Jeannie an email. Jeannie, Hank Taylor gave me your email address. I hope it's not inappropriate of me to contact you, but I'll be in the San Diego area this weekend and was wondering if I could take you and your son out for lunch or dinner on Friday or Saturday, just to catch up with you. Best wishes, Mark. Early Tuesday morning, I received a nice, unexpected response to my email. Mark. How nice to hear from you after all these years. Lunch on Friday will be fine for me and my son, Kevin. My address is XX. I will expect you at noon unless I hear from you otherwise. Your friend, Jeannie. Hank had been on duty since Tuesday, which meant he'd be at the firehouse until I left town. But he invited me to tour the station and have dinner with his crew. I accepted his offer, and later that day I sat at a table with the fire crew. Blacks, whites, Hispanics, men, and women. I still have a hard time explaining the feelings I had as I sat between two of Hank's co-workers. They were both willing to answer my questions. They were probably used to civilians being in awe of what they considered routine. What became apparent was the need for trust necessary to accomplish their tasks in firefighting. Each firefighter dared to enter a burning building only with the knowledge that their teammates would have each other's backs and do their job. This is probably when I began to realize that my life was starting to go off the rails. Back in high school, I replaced baseball and soccer, two team sports, with individual track and field events. Although the overall score of the track and field team depended on others, my contribution was based solely on my efforts. Even my chosen profession, sales, was similar to this. Whether or not I made a sale depended almost entirely on my efforts. The only teamwork I could point to since I turned 15 was my marriage to Debbie. Could my failed marriage have been due in part to my selfishness, or the fact that I married a woman with selfish traits similar to my own? On Thursday, I flew to San Diego, rented a car, and checked into the Coronado Hotel. On Friday, I drove north to Jeannie's house, one of 4 apartments in a 4-story townhouse. I rang the doorbell and waited, trying to hide a bouquet of flowers from a nosy neighbor. I almost dropped the flowers when the door opened. My God, Ginny was even more beautiful than she had been at 19. She was dressed in a bright blue sundress, and there was a little boy near her leg. Mark, welcome. She put her hands behind my head and kissed my cheek. Is that for me? She asked, pointing to the flowers. It was a stupid question, but I think she was trying to get me to say something because I was still just standing there, frozen. In response, I handed her the bouquet. Thank you, Mark. Please come in while I put this in the water. Mark, this is my son, Kevin. Kevin, this is Mr. Miller, an old friend I went to school with before I met your dad. Kevin held out his tiny hand and said, Hello, Mr. Miller. I finally found my speech and said, Hi, Kevin, shaking his hand. While Jeannie put the flowers in a vase, I looked around the apartment. The first thing that caught my eye was a folded flag in the center of a bookcase. On one side of the flag was a picture of a Marine. Attached to the frame were two medals, the Purple Heart and the Navy Cross. "That's my dad." I looked at the picture on the other side of the flag, Ginny with her husband and little Kevin on the beach. Just at that moment, Ginny walked into the room. "Ginny, I'm sorry if something comes out wrong, but this is a beautiful picture. The three of you look very much in love. You must miss him." "No need to apologize. That's good to hear. And yes, we were madly in love. I met him at Northwestern University. He was in the ROTC program when I was studying journalism. My classmates wondered why I had a crush on a military man, and most of my classmates didn't have much respect for the military. But besides being a strong, confident man, Chuck was the kind of man you could trust. He had a heart of gold." "There's that word again. Trust." Jeannie's eyes were watering slightly as she looked at the picture, so I broke the silence. "You haven't had lunch yet?" "Yeah, we have some catching up to do. Come on, Kevin. Mr. Miller is taking us to Red Robin." Kevin was very excited about this, and we jumped into Ginny's car instead of renting a car seat from me. The conversation was more animated during the ride, and by the time we got into the restaurant, the three of us were laughing at some silly joke Kevin had told us. Lunch had been great. Although there had been so many changes in Ginny's life since the last time we'd talked. Marriage, a baby, widowhood. She has remained the same, kind, smart, funny, and charming. At one point, Ginny asked me why I was in San Diego. I was embarrassed, but decided to tell the truth. "I told you about how I got told off by my mom and Hank, so the truth is, I came here to apologize to you for the way I ended things back then. You deserved better, and honestly, listening to you tell me about your marriage to Chuck, I realized you did a lot better." "What are you going to do now? Are you going back to Portland?" "My flight doesn't leave till Sunday night. I think I'm going to spend the next couple days at the beach, run around a bit, and try to get my mind right. I've got a lot to think about." Kevin dispelled the boredom by coloring with the crayons they hand out to kids at the restaurant when the two adults got carried away. But after 2 hours, we ran out of time, so we drove back to Ginny's. "Mark, would you like to go to a barbecue at my friend's house tomorrow?" "What, and spend the day alone contemplating your belly button? That's a lot to ask." Ginny laughed. "Well, if you change your mind and decide to come to the barbecue with us, pick me up tomorrow at 11. Dress casual, shorts, and a polo shirt. Oh yeah, bring a beer." I told Jeannie I'd see her later, kissed her on the cheek, and shook Kevin's hand. As I drove back to my hotel, all the reasons I loved Ginny during those 3 years in high school came flooding back at me. The next day, Ginny, Kevin, and I went on a picnic. Ginny was wearing white cropped shorts and some sort of t-shirt with a bra. The shorts weren't too short for a family picnic, but they showed off how trim she kept her athletic legs. The top only hinted at cleavage, sexy but discreet. She gathered her blonde hair into a ponytail. Aviator sunglasses hid her brown eyes. After we parked the car, Ginny took my hand to introduce me to her friends. As we approached a small group of men, apparently all Marines, I felt their gazes studying me. I got the feeling that this picnic was partly a test to see if I was good enough to date Ginny. We were introduced to each other, and Ginny left me to make sure Kevin was with the other kids. At least that's the reason she gave me. I turned to the group. "I hope this isn't a cliché, but thank you for your service." Captain John Clayton answered for the group. "Whether it is a cliché or not, we are always happy to hear it. My father served in Vietnam, and I see the pleasure in his eyes whenever we are together. I'm in uniform, and someone thanks me. Very different from what he experienced after returning from Vietnam. From that point on, the conversation turned to more enjoyable topics, including manly sports. The day flew by quickly. I spent some time with Ginny, some time with the men, and even spent an hour in the kitchen with the ladies exchanging cooking tips. At the end of the day, I was invited to join the men at a local tavern after I drove Ginny home. Kevin was asleep in his car seat. "So, did I pass?" "I think so. But Doreen will probably call me after you leave for the tavern. Then I'll get another call tomorrow after the men report to their wives tonight. I hope you don't mind too much. They're a close-knit group who take care of themselves. I will always be a part of them because of Chuck." He and John Clayton were very close in Afghanistan. I held my breath and decided to ask the question that was swirling around in my head. So, the fact that I'm being tested means you want to keep dating me? Yes, Mark. We've both changed since high school, but I still have something in my heart for you. If you want to keep dating me, I'd really like that. I'd like that too, Jeannie. Let's start the test. We laughed, and I remembered how much I used to love the sound of her laughter. It'll probably be late when I leave the bar. Can we see each other tomorrow if I pass the tests? Ginny laughed again. I usually go to Mass at 10. You can join me at Mass or come later. She looked me in the eye. When was the last time you were at Mass, Mark? Other than funerals and weddings? It's been at least 10 years. I slowly drifted away from the church when I moved to Oregon. I didn't stop believing, I just stopped going to church. We pulled up in front of her house. I gently pulled Kevin out of the car seat and carried him to bed. I turned around and saw Ginny in the doorway, looking at us with a smile on her face. I walked over to her, gave her a hug, and kissed her. She kissed me back. I'll see you tomorrow. I'll be here at 9:30. Wish me luck. I walked into the bar and was greeted by 5 men, including John Clayton. What are you having, Mark? I looked around quickly. A beer would be nice. Rodriguez, 1 beer for our friend. The bartender poured me a mug, and the 6 of us took a table. John was obviously the leader, so he started the whole thing. Mark, we're not trying to offend you, but you have to realize that 3 of us at this table, including me and Roddy the bartender, owe our lives to Chuck Turner. Did Jeannie tell you anything about this? No, I'd seen the Navy Cross, so I knew it had to be something special, but I didn't want to get involved, so I kept quiet. Good for you, showing respect. I will tell you, though. We were patrolling the mountains near Pakistan when we were ambushed by about 40 Taliban. We couldn't launch an airstrike because that would have caused an avalanche. We couldn't retreat because they would have held the high ground and outgunned us. Chuck ordered us to outflank them while he and Rodriguez stayed in position to draw them closer. It took us 3 hours over this rough terrain to advance behind the Taliban. Within 3 hours, Chuck and Roddy were occupying them. We were able to outflank them, and from the high ground we were able to destroy them. But by the time we got to Chuck and Roddy, both were wounded. Chuck had 4 wounds, and he was still fighting. He died in my arms. Roddy was unconscious with wounds to his head and leg. Roddy has a prosthetic leg, and that's why he's a bartender and not on active duty. So that's why we're responsible for Jeannie, at least until someone comes along and relieves us of the responsibility. Someone worthy. I understand, John. Let me put it to you this way. Ask Jeannie if I ever did anything disrespectful in the 3 years we were together. My worst sin was letting her leave, but I think it turned out better for her because she met Chuck and had their son. I didn't have the maturity then to be a good husband or father. I never touched a woman in anger, even when I caught my first wife with another man. I may not have what you have, the courage to accuse men shooting back at you, but I'm not a coward either. I wouldn't back down if it meant protecting the man I love from harm. I've recently realized that I'm a little self-centered, but I'll work on that. So, now that I know how things are, let me ask you all. I paused to look around the table. Do I have your permission to keep seeing Jeannie? People might think it was a little over the top to ask permission to date an adult, but I saw it as a way to show respect for their obvious concern for a fellow widow. I wasn't pretending, but I'm a good salesman because I'm a pretty good judge of character. And it was the right question because the answer was a broad smile from John and the others. Roddy, could you get us something tasty? Make it a Knob Creek. Rodriguez brought 7 shot glasses half filled with the amber liquid. John raised his glass for a toast. To Captain Chuck Turner. Rodriguez joined us and we all clinked glasses and drank. We stayed for a couple more hours, drinking slowly to avoid drunkenness, but touching on many topics. At one point I was told why Ginny wasn't currently dating anyone. John told me the whole background. Ginny and another Marine had started a serious relationship last year. The problem was that Jeannie couldn't be serious with the other Marine, not after losing her first husband. And Tom had dreamed of being a Marine his whole life. Tom told Ginny that he would quit the Marines, and Ginny told Tom that if he did, she would never speak to him again. Tom transferred to Lejeune right after that, and from then on, Ginny wasn't serious until she got your email. Doreen said she called that day, very excited about your visit. Don't say I said anything. I won't say anything, but thanks for sharing. The next day, my affair with Jeannie began. I had racked up some serious Alaska Air frequent flyer miles flying between Portland and San Diego. Every other weekend was spent with Jeannie and Kevin. Hotel rooms were getting expensive on top of airfare, and Ginny wasn't ready for us to consummate the relationship. John and Doreen were kind enough to put me up in their guest room. At home, I struggled to develop my interpersonal skills. Even my boss noticed a difference in my behavior. I joined the company's softball team. In San Diego, I played doubles tennis on the base courts. Jeannie was my partner, and we did well with new partners. This was my 5th trip to San Diego. It had been 3 months since my first visit. I walked out of the terminal and got into Jeannie's car. When I looked back, Kevin's car seat was empty. "Where's Kevin?" "Doreen and John are picking him up this weekend. I have a surprise for you. I hope you like him," Ginny replied as she pulled away from the curb, leaving the airport and heading north. Ginny didn't tell me anything else about our destination, so we talked about other things. She told me that Kevin was disappointed that he wouldn't see me until Sunday. He had really grown attached to me. I could tell Ginny liked that just by the tone of her voice. As we drove, I noticed that Ginny was wearing the same blue sundress she had been wearing at our first lunch, but this time she had no bra under the dress. We pulled up to La Jolla Beach and the tennis resort. She smiled broadly at me. "I think it's time, don't you?" My answer to her question was a wide grin. As soon as she parked the car, I grabbed her and kissed her. "You know I've fallen in love with you again, don't you, Mark?" "Sad." "Well, thank goodness, because I've been hoping you would since that very first weekend. I love you, Jeannie. What a weekend." Jeannie and I ordered room service and made love all Friday night. That's funny. We had sex twice in the 3 years we dated in high school, so we have some expectations of what that would be like. But the intervening years have taught us both something, thank goodness. Because what we did that night was nothing like the awkwardness of those 2 teenagers over 12 years ago. Let me just say that by the time I passed out after 2 a.m., a huge smile was shining on my face. We played tennis on Saturday afternoon and made love on Saturday night. Sunday morning, she surprised the hell out of me by taking us to a nude beach under the cliffs at Torrey Pines. Ginny stayed in her bikini swim trunks but took off her top. I mustered up the courage to take my swim trunks off for half an hour before worrying about sunburn and putting them back on. "How did you know about this beach? Don't tell me you've done this before." "Don't say anything, but Doreen and John come here from time to time. Doreen told me and swore me to secrecy. Now you're sworn in too. We watched people for a while and even thought about joining the volleyball game, but decided maybe next time. I figured that playing volleyball with a group of naked fellow students would be a great way to improve my interpersonal communication and team-building skills." It was early afternoon and time to pick up Kevin, so we headed back up the cliffs to the Clayton house. John greeted me with a firm handshake and a bottle of beer, and Doreen gave me a hug and a big smile. Kevin put his arm around my legs. We had dinner with the Claytons. Kevin spent the entire evening by my side. He seemed sad when Jeannie dropped me off at the airport. On the way home, I made a decision. 2 weeks later, we went back to the Claytons' place for drinks on Friday night. When John and I were alone, I initiated him into the matter. "I'm going to ask Ginny to marry me unless you have a reason why I shouldn't." "I'd be disappointed if you didn't. She's madly in love with you, and I can't imagine a nicer guy or anything else that would make her happier. Does this mean she'll move to Portland?" "If she says yes and agrees, I would try to get us back to the Chicago area. She misses her parents and siblings." "That's great, Mark. I know she's been talking about her family with Doreen. How are you going to work it out with Kevin?" "Yeah, I'm going to take him to lunch tomorrow and have a chat. Cross your fingers for me." You might be surprised by his reaction. That guy likes you. The next day, Ginny gave me a weird look when I told her that Kevin and I needed to run some errands together. But I got away with it, citing that it was guys' social time. We headed straight to Red Robin and took a table. Over 2 milkshakes, I asked a question. "Kevin, what would you say if I asked your mom to marry me? Would that be okay?" I held my breath, waiting for his answer. "That would be nice, Mr. Miller. My mom really likes you." "Do you, Kevin? Do you like me enough to live with your mom and you? Yeah. Would that make you my dad? Kind of. No one could ever replace your real dad. What did you call him? I called him Dad. Either. Then how about if your mom and I get married, you call me Dad? Would that be okay? Kevin had a cute smile on his face, and he replied briefly, Sure. We headed back toward his house, 2 ready, 1 left. I figured it would be hard for Kevin to keep our conversation a secret. As soon as we walked through the door, I had a ring in my hand and Kevin was carrying a bouquet of red roses. Ginny smiled when she saw the roses, then looked embarrassed when I dropped to my knees. Ginny, will you marry me? Not very original, but straight to the point. Ginny dropped to her knees and hugged me. Yes, I love you, Mark. That was all I needed to hear. Kevin gave us a hug. Unfortunately, he forgot to drop the roses first, and the thorns scratched my neck. Thankfully, that was probably the worst thing that happened in our years together. Epilogue. I'm not going to drag this out. My life with Ginny has been blessed in so many ways. We were married 3 months after I proposed. By then, I had found a great sales job at a startup north of Chicago, close enough to our families and old friends. Kevin now has a brother and sister. They all call me Dad because that's what Kevin calls me. Ginny still looks amazing after 3 kids. We still play doubles tennis, and please don't tell anyone. But we learned to play volleyball and have a game at Black's Beach whenever we visit the Claytons. Last May, our family met the Clayton clan in Washington, D.C. We took the usual tours, and on Memorial Day, we visited Chuck's grave in Arlington to pay our respects. It had been 10 years since Captain Turner had been taken from his wife and son. It was a sad, somber, and proud day. I was glad John and Doreen were there to help me comfort Kevin and Ginny. It took all day to bring back the smiles, and for a few days afterward, you could see the pain from time to time. But it was the right thing to do. To pay our respects to any person, whether a member of the military, a police officer, or a firefighter, who volunteers their lives knowing that one day they may be required to sacrifice everything to fulfill their duties. We are back from our trip, and it took a few weeks, but things are back to normal. Even Captain Charles Turner's flag, medals, and picture on the bookcase. For me, it's nice that Ginny and Kevin let me into their lives after having such a brave man as their husband and father. As for me, well, I'm glad I opened my eyes and ears to learn what trust really is. Even Hank has stopped threatening to kick my ass, although he still gets mad at me every time I miss a bunt during our softball league games. My excuse is that I'm distracted by a beautiful blonde with 3 cheering kids in the stands. My life is good,